Hi, it's great to be here. Sorry I was late, that's the first thing to say. I wish I attended Johnny's talk before I did this, but that's fine. I think I now learn more, reflecting backwards. Can I just get a feel? How many of you are in like health in general, health, IT, health? Is it basically the majority? Okay, that's fine. And is it largely an IT crowd? As in you work more on the technical end rather than the clinical end?
We'd rather not say.
Okay, no, it's just important to pitch it. So, I'm Wai Keong. I'm a hematology consultant at UCLH. As Tito said, I'm the Chief Research Information Officer. But in the last 2 years, really, half my job is there, and half is really one of the clinical leads for our electronic health record program. As some of you may be aware, if you're in the health space, UCLH, even though it says UCLH hospitals, it should be hospitals. It's about 6 different hospitals, and we all went from our old system into a single integrated electronic health record system called EPIC. And we turned this, I've got some colleagues here who worked on it, and we turned it on the 1st of April. So what I'm going to tell you today is a bit about our data migration experience, and hope there'll be something that you can take back with you. So just a bit of background where we started. Previous to EPIC, we were, I guess, a best of breed with a clinical portal on top type of organization. I list some things there. We had a PAS called CareCast, which I believe we were one of 2 customers in the whole country. We had another portal system called EHRS by CGI, one of 4 in the whole country. A document store that was created by them. We used a very established RIS called Soliton with CareStream packs. Our intensive care used ISIP. We had maternity Medway, which is used in quite a lot of places. Of course, in hospitals, you recognize this specialty databases, N equals 1,000,000. Our laboratory systems had about 3, and important thing to stress is our lab systems were not, I'll go into that, but it's run by a separate company, and we have a chemotherapy prescribing. This is just I guess these are the main systems. So what happened when we turned on EPIC? Everything in gray had to go into EPIC, and most of the things that are obviously still in black need to have new interfaces built. And just to say, the reason that I'm quite busy today is because of the stuff at the bottom here, which is our project to replace our chemotherapy prescribing system with EPIC as well. We didn't manage to get that done in time in April, but we plan to do that very soon. So what kind of data did we migrate? So I roughly divided it up into 2 main categories. I'll call it kind of non-clinical data and clinical data. The reason I want to just flag this up is because I know most about the stuff on the left. So if you came to hear about this stuff, I'm sorry. I know about things at a high level, but I was really much more involved in the clinical data migration stuff. So that will be the focus of my talk. So I'm talking about patient allergies, pathology results, radiology orders, diagnoses, documents, and so on and so forth. We'll go into that one by one. Just to say, if you want to just stop me at any time to ask for clarification, please do so. Okay, a few data migration terms, and I have no idea whether these terms are universally accepted or whether it's a specific health IT term or even a specific EPIC term. But just to set the scene of what I'm actually talking about today. So I've got 2 kind of data migration concepts in my head when I talk about data migration. One is the timing of it. So the stuff that I mainly be talking today about is this thing called data conversion. So this is stuff that happened before, in the period before using the system, where, for example, we've got 10 years worth of pathology results that need to be migrated into EPIC in our case. Cutover is a time period of kind of 1 day just before go live. So imagine I'm prescribing on my old system. Now it needs to go to the new system. Of course, you couldn't have migrated that data. So cutover is that process whereby human beings will have, we had human beings looking at one system and doing stuff into EPIC. So that is kind of the cutover period. And for both of this, there are 2 general methods. One is an automated system where a computer does it, and the other one is manual abstraction, where you basically get humans typing from one system to another. So today I'll be telling you a little bit about those 2 and our experience. Johnny, I guess when you did your talk, you were mainly talking about a computer-driven automation. No, it includes the, yeah, okay, fine. So it does cover that. Is there something I'm obviously missing? But maybe we can talk after the
talk. To roll back on.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess that sometimes the first thing to ask is really, especially when we're talking about clinical data, we had to get in the room and decide what is worth doing it, because as you guys will all know, it's a lot of work. So the first thing is clinical utility. Is it really needed for live patient care, as in at the point of care? Because you always need data at some stage for something. If you don't need it live, you can think, okay, this can go into my data archive. You have a 5-day workaround, 5 working day turnaround time for that. But is this really useful as it needs for live patient care? The other thing to consider, and I'm glad the whole data quality discussion was centered to your talk, was the source data quality. People might say, wouldn't it be great to have diagnosis data, but is it structured or is it free text? Is it structured in the way you do it in your department, or do you use like a central terminology like SNOMED, ICD-10? And the other thing, is it stored in one place? Like take diagnosis again. Is it stored in one system, or is it stored in the main system plus your specialty database plus your access database? Is it in one place? How far to go back? 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Who makes the decision? So at UCLH, when we did this, we created a data migration working group with adequate representation kind of across the clinical spectrum to do that. And of course, resources required, which links really back to, do we really have to do it? Okay, I kind of invented this last night as my understanding of my understanding. Obviously, there's a lot more into this, but I just wanted to talk you through this as my understanding of how the process took place. So first, you got the extract that the vendor will give you, and this can be in many different formats. Most of ours were in, I think, were in flat files. So the first thing that needs to be done is need to move to a staging database. So we had in most cases, we had a MySQL database set up with the appropriate tables and stuff. And I think the helpful vendors did actually provide a lot of that as well, so that we could transfer it from. One thing to say, I haven't gone into the whole commercials and contractual elements of it, which I'm sure a lot of you may be more familiar than me, but there's obviously commercial. You have the contract to get this extract when you're about to say, we don't want to work with you anymore, which is always a tricky one, and some are much more contentious, and you can basically be stuck at that step for months and months and months, and you can't progress. And then you got the creation of the load message, which is the message that the format of this that gets loaded into the Epic test system initially. And that can be quite tricky, and there's a lot of ETL that happens there. And then Epic itself needs to be prepared to receive the information. So what I mean by that is that if you're transferring a blood test result and it's called hemoglobin, you can't just throw it into Epic and Epic will not know what to do with it. You need to prepare Epic with the concept of hemoglobin, the concept of that particular consultant's name and stuff to prepare it. And then you load it into test. Then the first step is that clinical validation. So clinical validation is where and you hope, I missed out a lot of kind of the early validation that obviously the analysts would have done beforehand. When it's obviously broken, there's no point going to clinical validation. But assuming that a lot of things happen here, you go into the clinical validation step, you get myself and my colleagues looking at old system versus new system in a systematic way. And what I was really surprised was there was no suggestion of what systematic actually means, which I suppose, so we had to come up with one, but I suppose in proper data management, we would have had some help to say, representative sample, if you like. And then of course, if there's errors, it goes back here and it goes through this cycle. And this cycle can be 1, 2, 3, 10, 20 times. We ran out of time. We only did 2. One of my colleagues working with me at the moment on our legacy data decommissioning and archiving told me in his previous project he did 20. So I don't know what is the sweet spot, but 2 was definitely not enough. And of course, the final load into live. And I've just put this concept there as turn on interface. What I mean by that is like, let's say you've migrated 10 years worth of pathology data up, and we're going live in April, but your extract, you only load it up to January. And for that kind of data, because the source comes from a live lab system, we then turn off the interface into the live system before the system's actually live, if that makes sense. Then the system gets filled up with contemporaneous data. I'm not sure what that is a proper IT term for that, but I just put it there. So that's a high-level methodology. So I'm just going to, and there was another concept which I learned as part of this process, which the data migration experts remind me, which is migrated data is not the source data. What that means to me is that, let's say if I'm going back to do analytics on the data, you know, the migrated data would also go into the data warehouse, the Epic feeds. But if I'm going to do research or audit or something on the data, ideally I want to go back to the data archive of the source system rather than the migrated data, because you would have had to transform the data from its, if you like, original form into the migrated form. And it was a concept I had to get my head around a little bit, but I think it's kind of important when you decide whether or not to use the data in the migrated form for further purposes. Okay.
Does that mean that you've got a problem there that you can never actually decommission? You never get to the final stage, which is decommissioning.
That archiving. So you still have the archive. Right. Yeah. So yeah. No, it's funny you mentioned decommissioning and finance directors. So because decommissioning of course means you save money as well, because you no longer pay those licenses. I believe that at UCL, is this recorded, by the way? Okay. Anyway, apparently there was a system that we stopped using a few years ago, and which never got decommissioned, and we're still paying every single year even though we don't use the system. So of course, decommissioning is high on the finance director's agenda. So it's funny, the legacy data board, which looks after that, has like 5 finance guys and 3 IT guys, which is, I guess, it's part of our business case, of course, as part of this EPIC program on money that we can save from turning off the system. Anyway, side issue. I think you've already mentioned this. You need a data archiving and legacy decommissioning system. The only thing I want to add here is that as part of the data migration process, you have to assume that it may not work in time for your system to go live. And the way you might mitigate that risk is to have, where it is practicable, obviously I realize this is not practical for absolutely everything, is to have view-only access still to your legacy system. Because there could have been errors in migration that you didn't catch. In the healthcare situation, there may be patients that were not migrated that you need to go and look for. And also, as I said, as a backup, if you really didn't manage to complete the migration in time. And we do use that all the time still. Okay, so I'm now literally going to the next stage of my talk, which I'll just be talking. I can't obviously go through all the clinical data items, but I just want to use a few of the clinical data items to highlight different things. So let's talk about diagnoses. If you ask clinicians, would you want the diagnosis of a patient from your system to old system to migrate into the new system? Nobody would say no, right? I mean, there's such an obvious thing. That's what healthcare is about making diagnosis. But in our old system, we didn't really store diagnosis in any way. The only concept of diagnosis that we stored was in ICD-10 codes, and they were really only created at discharge summary when the patient gets discharged from the hospital, and by the coders who would go through the notes and code it and send it for commissioning purposes. Now, remember that we're talking about an electronic health record system that we're migrating data into. We're not migrating into another coding system, which in case, of course, you want to migrate it. And the other thing is, most of the diagnosis that clinicians are talking about that they want migrated is actually what they have dictated or typed into the letters that they write to the referrers, which is a set of free text. And obviously, you know, spelling errors, people thought, oh, wouldn't it be great if you use natural language processing to extract those concepts? I mean, I'm afraid that even that will fail. Everyone says things slightly differently. So we chose not to migrate. The reason we chose not to migrate is for that reason. Most of it is in narrative. And the reason we didn't do the ICD-10 is we actually looked at it. We looked at the ICD-10 codes, but saying things like pneumonia not otherwise specified, or infections of the ear is really not that helpful clinical concept. And what we don't want to start off with is an electronic health record system, which is meant for clinical and health use, starting off with a list of diagnoses that is obviously created for classification and commissioning purposes. It's just not, and we know people never remove things once it reaches that. It's just, so we decide not to do it. So that's diagnosis. Medications and allergies. So we had an electronic prescribing system by MedChart. It's for inpatients since 2015, so we have 4 years. It contained only obviously hospital prescriptions and discharge medications. It's not used in outpatients. And because it's not used in outpatients, therefore that medication list is very unlikely to be up to date. You went to hospital 3 years ago, this was your discharge medications, your GP and the subsequent appointments would have changed it. But slightly worse than that is you will have to map the medications from one system to the other. So you hope that there will be some form of identifying code that was provided, DM plus D, or some form of proprietary code. So both systems, Epic and MedChart, use First Data Bank, which a lot of you will be familiar of. But in the load process into MedChart, they stripped away all the identifiers. Don't ask me why. It was stripped away. And of course, once it's stripped away, you start updating it. And you might change the spelling, add another thing. So how in the world are you going to map backwards again? You've lost that, right? You lost that forever. So therefore, despite this being obviously clinically useful, allergies, right? First thing that everyone asks you, which patient says, please don't ask me again. Clinically useful, but it was decided it was not feasible. Surgical procedures. Once again, it's not how surgeons describe it, but how a coding system called OPCS done it. We decided to do this in the end because a lot of the surgeons are it's a group of people that are actually quite au fait with OPCS code, so they kind of understand what it means. It was also very easy to map. They were all structured very much, and Epic also used OPCS. So the amount of work that went into this, we talked about the resource factor was so low, and we thought it's actually quite helpful, even if they, so we did just decided to do this, and this was actually one of the easiest things to do. Laboratory data. Now, blood pathology is a very important part of clinical care. You see a doctor, they examine you, they send you for tests, the test results come back, and the decision is made. So we had data back to 2003 in our old system, and clinicians, including myself, made it clear that I do look back all the way there, so we wanted everything. And then one of our IT leads had to make this decision. So what is the source data? Where are you going to get it from? Because obviously the data starts in the lab system and then went into our old portal and then now needs to go into Epic. We had a choice between starting in the lab end or starting in the portal end. So his reasoning that we should do it at the portal end is because that is where that is where you currently look for your information. And also our portal is a collection of a lot of old systems that don't even exist anymore as well. So, our lab systems were changed in 2011, the results go back even before that. So the decision was to take it from the portal. But that introduces another layer of complexity because lab systems are very good at creating HL7 messages because that's what they do and that's how they communicate. Epic wants the results coming in, even for data migration purposes, as HL7 messages, because it goes through a really beautiful process whereby they validate against the hospital number, validate against the date of birth, so all the validation checks that is built into receiving a message can be taken advantage of as part of that. But then you basically have to reverse engineer a HL7 message from a portal system, which never ever had to send out lab results of HL7 messages. Does that make sense? So in the end, this is BCS, isn't it? So we should mention vendor names. We used Hitachi Pentaho tool to do that particular ETL, and the people doing it were UCLH staff. So we didn't get external people to do this particular one. Obviously, Epic needs to be prepared to receive all these laboratory results like full blood count, FBC. FBC needs to exist. And you can imagine as part of your first validation, a lot failed just because the wrong codes were created and things like that. And the other thing that was really interesting was because we actually received results from 3 laboratories, 3 laboratory systems. They never harmonized, they never look at each other's system to say, is that code being used? So we then have this situation whereby AIN is used in 3 systems, but all mean completely different things. But obviously in Epic, it needs to mean one thing. So the people need to do some clever mapping again. So lots of errors came from that as well. And the other important thing to stress is that laboratory results get updated. So you may have a test done in December, let's say a biopsy of the breast, and then a year later, unfortunately, let's say that patient with breast cancer relapses, but now there's a new test that you can do on the original sample. So you go to the original sample, you do a new test and add to it, that update will never come back to the archive data. So because there's no link, if you like, there's no link backwards. So archive data literally will never get updated. I have to say that I only realized this after. So we are tolerating a risk at the moment that really old results, actually not that old, I mean any results older than 3 months prior to go live, if there's an update, will not get updated. There'll be another result line, but the original one will have to physically remove off the system. I want just to show you an example of things going wrong. So this is a result of a urine culture. And it tells you, it should look a bit like this. What bug grew, and these are the antibiotics and whether they are resistant to the antibiotics or sensitive to the antibiotics. I told the data migration team that this will definitely go wrong and please don't send it back to us until you solve it because I know it will go wrong. And this is how it looks like. You can probably figure out what went wrong here, right? There's a line break, I think, or a tab character. The other thing is this is a fixed width font and this is not a fixed width font, right? So anyway, this was one of the things that took quite a lot of, and then of course it's interesting about data migration as well, is like how people view abnormal results are different between systems. So you have to check that as well. So just as an example. Specialty databases. So in generally, we didn't migrate this for hopefully obvious reasons for people in this room. But what we did do was for certain specialties, we did agree if they really had a really good database that they governed really well, and we also really wanted them to use Epic to support their practice as much as possible. We agreed to do it for the epilepsy database. We mapped the medications, mapped the diagnosis, mapped seizure frequency, and then we ran out of time. And we didn't manage to load it into the system. And I'm kind of glad we didn't. Because when I then spoke to the epilepsy clinicians after Epic Go Live, because they're still struggling on how they use Epic, because it's a very different way of working when they're so used to just dictating everything or writing, and then someone else types it into their database for them. They're kind of having to do that live in the patient care environment now, and they haven't quite figured out how to do it. So if we did migrate it, almost from day one, everything is now out of date because they never keep it updated. They are still keeping the original database up to date now. So what I said is that until we figure out a workflow for them that they could use it, there's no point migrating the data. Does that make sense? Yeah. What's the time, Tito?
We are, that's why it's...
Okay, let's just skip. I just want to show you one thing. So you know how I said allergy, we decided not to be feasible, but I just wouldn't let it go. And then they tell me, so I decided to look at the codes myself. You always try to avoid this, but I couldn't help it. So we extracted it. I wanted to challenge to see, can I map it from one system to another? Because they did both come from first data bank. So as long as you don't change the spelling in theory, you should be able to do it. So in short, we managed to do it. But the technical team wouldn't do it anymore because they ran out of resource. So because what you needed to do here is once again generate HL7 messages to load back. And I had no idea how to do that. And then of course you got data modeling clashes. You know, in MedChart, you can either be allergic to a drug, the drug class, or a actual product. In Epic, they just have one allergy file, an allergen file, which actually is probably the best way to do it. And of course, you can give up about things like severity, certainty of the allergy and stuff like that. And then you got food. Apparently this patient was allergic to water. I'm not sure how that works, but anyhow, I'd like to show you how we actually did this in the end. So I did all the mapping with my pharmacy colleagues. It took a lot of time, but I think it was worth it because at least my colleagues will start with Epic with the allergies loaded. I wrote a keyboard typing script. It's going to make you, for those perfectionists among you, you might go, oh my God, can you actually do migration like this? Okay, imagine that's a spreadsheet, right? On the first column is the hospital number. On the second column is the Epic ID for the allergen. The third is whether it's an allergy or intolerance. And the D is any free text comments. I just want to show how it's done. Okay, so hopefully this video plays. So the script, read it, it's called auto hotkey. It reads that. This is Epic. It will actually now enter the hospital number. There you go. And then it goes to it clicks on the allergy screen, it types it all in. And so on and so forth. It's very nice to see when there are like 20 allergies because it just goes boom, 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 boom. And then, okay, so this was carried out for 17,000 patients, approximately. And of course, you need a human being to validate it because the problem is that it's a keyboard script. So if the computer is slow and doesn't keep up, you'll type into nothing. So how are you going to find the human beings to just sit there in front of a computer and saying next, next, next? But it's much cheaper than paying pharmacists to type it across, and you can't afford pharmacists to type it across. Anyhow, that's what we did. So I call it computer-aided manual abstraction. It still needed humans. And I enjoyed it so much, we did it again for something that we said we couldn't do, which is blood special requirements.
So they let you do that?
Well, I got it through the Medicine Safety Committee and stuff. We documented everything well. We documented all the steps and the data quality checks. And yeah, it probably was the one that has the most data quality checks done actually compared to everything else. But anyway, I'm glad we got it done. So I'm going to skip that. So in conclusion, I come to realize that it's also data migration is clearly a skill. There's a whole knowledge base around it, and a lot of vendors have expertise in, but perhaps not as much as I would like. It's much harder when it's part of a large IT implementation project because it's just another group. And the other thing that I found, I like the fact that you had that gigantic table in your picture earlier, because the problem here was I looked after the clinical data migration, but MPI, master patient index migration, was another group, and the documents was another group. So there were MPI errors that caused my clinical data not to be migrated, and I didn't know it. And then so on and so forth. And the document group had no clinical representation, for example. So the method, so it's just things like, why wasn't it one group? I don't know. And just to say that it does make a massive difference when data is properly migrated. So that's it. Thank you.